So this clay has been sitting here overnight, which in a lot of cases would not amount to much drying time at all. One of the things you have to learn to be sensitive to if you're going to be making pots is drying conditions. And right now it's in the winter. The heat is on. I haven't been actively making pots in here. You can figure the relative humidity is very low. Not a lot of air movement, but I'm sure this clay is dried enough to begin working with. Okay, as soon as I dug into the clay, I, as I said, discovered what consistency we had. Here's what we've got. Things had dried more than I had expected, which you try to avoid, but it can happen, and you're in luck to be able to see how I deal with that. What we've got here, these two lumps were more or less perfect throwing consistency, and they're bagged up for keeping. I will probably double bag them. These two are just a little drier than I'd like. The fifth one is in here. This is a bag. This end of it is commercial clay that when I first dug into this, I decided it was a little wetter than I wanted, and I kind of saved it for, throwing trimming chucks, for example. This is one of the 5 clumps that was drying, and it's quite a bit too dry. Not severely, but I mean it's way drier than I would want to work with. Drier than these two over here. So I'll show you what we do with those. Okay, here you have your wettest and your driest clay. This is the wetter clay on top. As I say, that was a commercial clay that when I got it was wetter than I wanted. You can air dry that to use it too. I just hung on to it for in case I needed any wetter clay. This is the drier clay on the bottom. Now the first thing that we're going to do here is start smacking this together. And then if we cut this in half like this, and plop this on here, now we have 4 alternating layers of different consistencies, of 2 different consistencies. And we'll cut it in half this way. Do the same thing. Now we have 8 alternating layers of the same 2 differing consistencies. You can keep doing this however long you want to. And this actually gets to be a little bit, I'm going to stop doing that at this point. This is a little bit like what is actually called wedging. I've said before, wedging is not the right term, but it's what we all say. The term wedging refers specifically to a situation where you pound your clay on a wheel, on the wedging table around like this. You want to smooth this off into a dome, and then cut the clay like this. Grab that, flip it over, pound it down on that clay, and keep doing that. You could do it without actually rotating the clay in any way at this point, by rounding it off again. Smoothing it off is to avoid trapping air bubbles. when it comes together. Supposedly, from what I've read, the term wedging comes from the shape with which it comes together, which creates a wedge that drives the air out the sides. Now, I used to do that when I first started making pots. Because the only wedging technique I knew was the ram's horn method, was what had been taught in the basic class that started me out. And I wanted to prep larger amounts of clay. I'm going to cut this in half because what I will have here now is still going to be wetter than I want to throw it. It's getting close. But I'm going to take the two halves of this. This is where I'm not making any attempt not to exclude air. I'm just mixing it together. And I feel like I have kind of a dish of clay. It's going to be heavier on this end. And with each stroke, I rotate it a little bit in picking it up and then take the clay on the outside and force it to the middle. And this is a real effective way of evening out the clay. Anyway, I'm not going to even this out too much. This clump is going to be mixed with one of these that is just a little too dry. And the other one will be mixed with the other clump. Okay, this is what we have at this point. Each of these, one half is the clay that I had just put together before. The other half is one of the clumps that was drying. It was just a little stiffer than what I wanted. My guess is that when they're wedged together, they'll be absolutely right within the range that I want for throwing. Okay, this is where we're going to start with this. This has been cut in half and restacked twice, just like I did the other one. I'll start recording the procedure from here on out. And a couple comments to make first. One thing I'd like to point out, if I can get this right, I want you to notice the height of my wedging table. I just measured it. It's about 27 inches off the floor. I'm a little over 6 feet, not too much. And this is a tip I took from Michael Cardew's book. Let's switch to a fixed camera. Okay, this is a tip that I took very early on from Michael Cardew's book, Pioneer Pottery, as to the height of your wedging table, that it should be relatively low. And I agree 100%. You want it low enough that you can get your weight on top of the clay. You do less work with your muscles if you can use your weight to your advantage in wedging clay. Additionally, I'll say right here, I personally use wedging as a generic term for clay prep, even though I've shown you at this point what actually qualifies as wedging. I said I used to do that. I quit doing it because I found I had little tiny pieces of clay sticking to everything around my studio that were flying out as I slammed the clay down. Now I may have been slamming it down harder than you need to. I've never seen anybody in this country prep clay this way, other than maybe evening out on even clay. But I spent some time working with a potter in Germany, and that was what he did. In fact, his wedging table was like bell tight on me. I continued doing clay the way I ordinarily do, and it was really a lot of work with that tall wedging table. And I don't think he smacked the clay down as hard as I was. But anyway, I was getting little pieces of clay all over my studio and the sides of pots. And I just thought, well, there'd be different ways to deal with it. I decided to learn a different way of prepping clay. That's when I pursued learning to do what's usually called the Japanese spiral kneading technique. I didn't have any instruction in that, descriptions. I'd seen photographs, I'd never seen a video of it, but I just started working on it, and It took me a while to get good at it. It was, again, figuring out for myself. I remember, I think it took me like a year before I could do it effectively with the clay staying in the same spot on the wedging table. But it's something you just simply need to get the feel of, and you learn to do it by doing it. And I made the comment before that wedging clay that is softer than you want to throw with is so little actual work. It's what you're going to do in reprocessing, that it's just an excellent way to learn the motion through repetition, to learn to make the clay do what you want to do. I have to say, you know, I run into a lot of students who don't really want to learn to wedge clay. And what I'll say to that is, well, seriously, if you want to learn to make pots, that's just a bad attitude. It is true that clay you buy today from a clay supplier, I wouldn't have agreed with this years ago, but there have been improvements in pug mills. I think the biggest thing is a much higher vacuum that they use in the vacuum chamber. Really helps just squeeze the clay together. And there may be more to it than that, I don't know, but it's absolutely true that modern pug mills turn out clay that is totally ready for use. And if you're buying clay from any established clay supplier, the clay as you get it, if it's relatively fresh, is going to be perfectly fine for use right out of the bag. Fact remains that if you make pots, you end up with a lot of clay that needs to be reworked. And to resist learning to wedge clay is just a mistake. What you end up doing there is you end up being afraid of your clay, afraid that you don't understand it well enough to work with it. You want to get past that. Now, wedging is something you learn to do by doing it, just like throwing. It's a lot easier to learn than throwing. It requires a certain amount of strength, and you find if you start doing it that the muscles you use will develop a lot more rapidly than throwing skill develops. So it's not something to be afraid of, it's something to be embraced as something you want to learn to do. Now I am going to give you the best instruction that I can in basically spiral kneading. And that's not going to make it magically happen, but if you start to work on it, you'll have a lot more to work with than I did when I started working with it. So we'll set up the camera and get on with it.